The wind pressed against the old windows that afternoon, whistling through the cracks like it was trying to slip inside. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, coloring in the corner of the living room, careful not to make noise. The air carried every word from the kitchen. At first, it was only sharp voices, the same tired rhythm of blame and defense. Then my name cut through. "She's a curse," my mother snapped, voice tight as a wire. My father's reply landed like a stone. Everything fell apart after she was born. The job, the baby we were fine before. I froze, crayon still pressed to the page. I had always known the walls in our house didn't keep much in, but I never expected them to echo words like those. Curse, bad luck, mistake. They weren't whispered, they were thrown into the air like facts. At 10 years old, I didn't understand all of it, but I knew enough. The fight ended the way most of them did, silence heavy as smoke. My mother stepped into the hallway, her eyes fixed somewhere past me. "Go pack a bag," she said. I thought maybe we were visiting someone. Maybe a sleepover. I asked, for how long? She didn't answer. In my room. I folded my favorite jeans, slipped in a hoodie too big for me, and tucked my stuffed rabbit, Penny, deep into the backpack's corner. I felt embarrassed to bring her, but more embarrassed to leave her behind. The drive was quiet, the car heater rattling, my forehead leaning against the window as leaves whipped past in the wind. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. When she pulled into the driveway across town and left the engine running, I realized the bag wasn't for a visit at all. The car stopped in front of a house I knew well, my grandparents. I'd spent holidays there, birthdays too, though those celebrations had grown quieter each year. My mother didn't shut off the engine. She kept her hands on the wheel. Eyes forward, knuckles pale. "Get out," she said. I hesitated, waiting for the part where she laughed, or softened, or told me to hurry back inside. None of that came. I opened the door, clutching my backpack, Penny's ear poking through the zipper. The door shut behind me with a final click, and before I could turn back, the car was already rolling away. I rang the bell, my stomach a knot. My grandfather opened the door just a crack, squinting at me. "Maris." "What are you doing here?" His voice carried more weariness than surprise. "My mom dropped me off," I whispered. He looked down the street, the taillights already gone. He sighed, the kind of sound that carried years of surrender. "We can't go against your parents." "Honey." He stepped back just enough to hand me a folded blanket, then closed the door firmly, leaving me on the step. The air grew sharper as the sun sank, and I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders. I watched the windows, hoping one would open again, but nothing stirred inside. Hours passed before I heard a voice across the street. Maris. It was Mrs. Briggs Lenora, my grandparents' neighbor. She hurried over, her sweater slipping off one shoulder. She didn't ask questions, just ushered me into her home. The warmth hit me first, then the smell of cinnamon and old books. She wrapped me in one of her husband's oversized sweaters, sleeves covering my hands, and set a cup of tea in front of me. I sat on her couch, staring out the window at the house across the street. Its windows stayed dark, curtains drawn, no sign of movement. I kept waiting for headlights, for someone to remember, but the night only deepened, and the silence stretched until it felt permanent. Lenora's spare room became mine within a week. She cleared space in the dresser, tucked my drawings into a shoebox, and set Penny the rabbit on the pillow like it belonged there. Life with her was steady, no shouting, no slammed doors, no surprises. But steadiness didn't erase the absence. At school, the empty chair followed me everywhere. During the spelling bee, when the principal called finalists to the stage, parents filled the front row with cameras and cheers. I looked toward the second row where Lenora sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. Teachers scanned the crowd, waiting for someone else to appear beside her, then gave up. It was the same at art shows, choir concerts, even the spring science fair. Each time my name was announced, applause echoed, but there was always a hollow where my family should have been. That hollow became part of me, as visible as the ribbon pinned to my shirt. Still, I kept writing. Short notes. Awkward cursive. Hi, Mom, I got an A on my test. Dad, I miss you. On birthdays. I added glitter stickers or drew hearts in the margins. I slipped each envelope into Lenora's blue mailbox and pictured them arriving somewhere, giving my parents reason to remember. One afternoon, after school, Lenora called me into the kitchen. She held a stack of envelopes in her hands, rubber banded together. My handwriting curved across every one. These came back, she said softly. All of them. Returned to sender. I reached for them, fingers trembling. The stamps were smudged from rain, corners bent from travel. A few still had the stickers I'd chosen so carefully. They don't live there anymore. Lenora added, her voice steady but gentle. They haven't for a while. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. That night, I laid the envelopes across my bed like soldiers returning from a lost battle. One by one, I stacked them again, tucked them back into the shoebox, and slid it under my bed. It was the night I realized that words could leave me, but they would never reach the place I wanted them to go. By the time I was 15, Lenora trusted me with her Saturday cleaning ritual. We pulled down boxes from the tall cabinet in her kitchen, sorting piles into keep trash, and not sure yet. The air smelled of lemon polish, the kind she swore could fix almost anything. I opened a faded cardboard box marked Misc. Inside were brittle recipes, yellowed church bulletins, and at the very bottom, a thick manila envelope with my name written in my grandmother's looping cursive. Not to Maris or with love, just my name. Like a label. I slid the papers out. The first was a bank statement dated the year I was born, a savings account in my name, opened with $500. I turned the pages, each line showing slow growth over birthdays and Christmas deposits. By the time I reached the most recent statement, the balance had climbed to over $12,000. My breath caught $12,000, more than I had ever touched, more than Lenora's entire yearly pension check. For a moment, I imagined what it might have meant college, a car, even just security. But the last page told a different story. Balance zero. Withdrawal date 2 weeks after my mother left me on that doorstep. 2 signatures sat at the bottom. Names I knew too well, my parents. The paper trembled in my hands. They hadn't just walked away. They had cleaned me out, too. Not an oversight, not a misunderstanding. A deliberate choice. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but no tears came. Rage settled low and steady, not burning, but smoldering. Lenora touched my shoulder when she saw my face, but she didn't speak. She knew silence could sometimes be kinder than pity. That night, I dug out the old drawing I'd made years earlier, the one of a family holding hands under a crooked roof. I smoothed the crumpled paper, stared at the taped seams. Then I took out fresh paper and redrew it the same house. But only 2 figures now, me and Lenora. No shadows, no dog we never had. At the bottom, I pressed hard with the pencil until the words cut into the paper. Start here. Not long after. I walked 3 blocks to the corner cafe and asked for an application. I was still a year shy of the legal working age, but the woman behind the counter looked me over, took in the determined set of my shoulders, and said, "You look like you mean business." She slid the form across anyway. By the end of the week, I was bussing tables, wiping counters, and memorizing the hum of the espresso machine like it was a lullaby. The hours were long, but the paycheck, small as it was, felt like proof I existed on my own terms. When the cafe slowed, I added a second job scrubbing floors at a 24-hour gym. The smell of disinfectant clinging to me even after showers. Later, I picked up diner shifts on weekend mornings, carrying trays heavy with pancakes and coffee pots. My clothes always smelled of bleach or bacon grease, but I didn't care. Each dollar stacked in the envelope under my mattress was a declaration I was building something no one could drain. Between shifts, I spent hours at the Cedar Rapids Public Library. The librarians didn't question why I was always there, hunched over a computer or taking notes in the free workshops. I learned the basics of coding, stumbled through design programs, and filled notebook margins with half-formed ideas. One afternoon, I sketched a name at the top of a page OpenVest. It wasn't polished just 2 words that carried weight. I wanted to build a place for kids like me, the ones who didn't have anyone to guide them through financial aid forms or leases or even how to file taxes. A resource for the forgotten, the invisible. I didn't know how it would happen, not yet. But as I walked home that evening, warm wind brushing my face, I felt the first hint of something I hadn't known since childhood a beginning. By 19, the sketches and notes I had scribbled at the library had grown into something people could actually use. OpenVest was still rough a basic site with a handful of guides I wrote myself, but the message caught on. Foster teens, kids in shelters, students with no family to co-sign leases started finding it. They left comments late at night. This helped me apply for college. I didn't know where else to look. Each message reminded me why I had started. One afternoon, a local journalist called. She had seen the site, wanted to do a feature. I almost said no, but Lenora convinced me. Sometimes the quietest builders deserve to be seen, she told me. So I agreed. Sitting for a photo at the library where it all began. The headline ran the next week, "The Founder Who Made Herself from Nothing." I clipped the article, folded it into a notebook, and tucked it away. There was pride, but not the kind that swells into celebration. It felt steadier than that, like a hand pressed firmly on my back saying, "Keep going." Then came a second article, this time in a national digital magazine. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, opportunities, even offers I didn't know how to answer. But the noise outside didn't change the quiet inside. I still worked late shifts, still walked home with bleach-stained sneakers, still tucked money into the envelope under my mattress. A week later, I was at St. Luke's Hospital with Lenora, who had twisted her ankle on her porch steps, while she was taken back for x-rays. I waited in the lobby, scrolling my phone absent-mindedly. That's when I heard her voice. I looked up and saw my mother across the hall, leaning over a girl who couldn't have been more than 12. Her tone was soft, her hand steady on the child's shoulder, gentle in a way I had never received. Her eyes lifted briefly, brushed over me, then moved on. No pause, no recognition, as if I were just another stranger in the waiting room. I sat frozen, the sound of her voice lingering, wondering which cut deeper, that she had forgotten me, or that she hadn't and chose not to see me anyway. 2 decades had passed since the night Lenora wrapped me in her husband's sweater. By 30, I was in Austin, running an office with glass walls and a team who believed in the mission of OpenVest. The hum of keyboards, the shuffle of papers, the steady rhythm of building something from nothing, it all felt like the life I had once drawn in pencil and labeled "Start Here." One morning, a stack of unopened mail sat on my desk, and among the flyers and bank statements was a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock. My name typed neatly on the front. The return address wasn't a person, but a law firm in Cedar Rapids. Inside was a letter written in clinical language, but sharp enough to cut. My parents, through counsel, were requesting that I help pay for my younger brother's college tuition. They framed it as an act of continuity, a gesture of family responsibility. They cited the years they raised and supported you as justification. I read the phrase twice. The years they raised and supported me. The words were so clean on paper, so absolute. It was as if the doorstep, the blanket, the returned letters, the drained account had never existed. Before the disbelief could settle, another blow arrived in my inbox. An email from my uncle, subject line "Family Duty." He wrote that we all make sacrifices for kin, that blood ties come with obligations, that I had been given a chance and now it was my turn to give back. I didn't reply. I printed the letter and the email, placed them side by side on my desk, and wrote a note in thick black marker across a sticky pad. My silence is not an agreement, it's a boundary. I pressed it to the top page, slid everything into a manila folder, and locked it away. But as I turned the key, I knew the past wasn't finished testing how much I was willing to endure in the name of family. The package arrived in an ordinary cardboard box, no return address, just a scribbled note inside. Found this in storage. Thought it might be yours. Beneath the note was a plastic grocery bag, brittle with age. wrapped around a VHS tape. I borrowed a converter from the IT guy in my office building and slid the tape into the machine. The grainy image flickered onto the screen. Time-stamped April 2004. There I was, a 10-year-old girl standing on a porch, backpack straps cutting into my shoulders, Penny's ear poking out of the zipper. The camera wobbled, then steadied enough to catch my father's voice. "You don't live here anymore." The sound of a car door slammed, tires crunched against gravel, and the taillights disappeared. On screen, I didn't cry, I just blinked. Frozen, like I hadn't learned the rules of the world yet. I sat in silence long after the tape ended. Proof had found me undeniable, unedited, permanent. It wasn't just memory anymore, it was record. That night, I gathered everything I had kept, the bank statements with my parents' signatures, the legal demand letter, my uncle's email. I filmed a short statement at my desk. No music, no dramatic pauses. My voice was calm. This isn't revenge. This is record-keeping for every child told they were the problem, for every kid erased from their own family's story. I posted the video along with the digitized clip. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. Within 24 hours, millions. The comments filled my inbox. Strangers who had been disowned, foster kids who had slept on porches of their own, people who had carried silence for decades. The story had always been mine alone to carry. Now it belonged to the world, and the weight shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The envelope was thick, sealed in gold foil, addressed in looping script. Inside was an ornate invitation to my younger brother's birthday banquet at a high-end hall in Cedar Rapids. No note, no acknowledgement of the years gone, just the words, "with love." Darlene printed at the bottom like an afterthought. I went anyway, not out of nostalgia, but clarity. Sometimes you walk into fire not to burn, but to prove you've already survived worse. The hall shimmered with gold linens, crystal centerpieces, and clusters of relatives I hadn't seen in decades. At check-in, the woman with the guest list smiled politely. "You're at the overflow table," she said, gesturing toward the far corner near the emergency exit. My table had no flowers, no centerpiece, just a folded card with overflow printed in plain type. I sat alone while laughter rose from the round tables in the center of the room. A few cousins glanced my way, then turned back quickly, as though looking too long might draw trouble. Dinner was served in courses, waiters gliding between tables with trays of wine and silver-domed plates. I picked at mine, more focused on the stage. My father eventually stood, glass in hand, thanking the guests for standing by our family all these years. He didn't look toward me once. My name was never spoken. The applause swelled, but I stayed still, pen already in my hand. On the back of the overflow card, I wrote a single line. This table was never mine. I placed it neatly on the white plate, folded my napkin, and rose. I walked past the polished dance floor, past the laughter, past the walls draped in gold. No one stopped me, and no one called my name. The courtroom was nearly empty when the judge set his papers aside and spoke with a voice that left no room for argument. "She owes you nothing." My parents sat 2 rows ahead, their shoulders stiff, their lawyer silent. I didn't look at them. I only felt the air shift, lighter than it had been in years. Days later, outside my office in Austin, they appeared. My mother stepped forward, purse clutched tight, arms beginning to lift. "You'll always be my daughter," she said, voice cracking. I raised my hand just enough to stop her, then stepped back. The hug fell away before it reached me. My father lingered a few feet behind, arms crossed, eyes hard. I turned and walked inside without another word. Weeks after, my cousin Naomi called, her voice breaking. She confessed that her mother had begun calling her baby a curse after a string of hardships. The word jolted through me like a wire. I told her what no one had told me at that age, that a child is never to blame for misfortune, that curses aren't real, but the scars they leave are. She listened, nodding through tears, and for the first time I felt the cycle bending in a new direction. Not long after, Lenora agreed to move into my house. Her books lined the shelves, her slippers settled under the bed, and above the dresser hung the drawing I had remade at 15, a girl walking toward an open door. One evening, I returned from a youth gala, my speech still ringing in my ears. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the entryway and paused at the threshold. The door was mine now, wide open, steady in its frame. Not family anymore,